dun, da-na-na-na-na-na, da-na-na-dun-dun-dun, da-da-da, diddly-dee-dee-dee. Ba-dum.
Well, hello, and we're going to talk about everything sourdough. I am pulling my starter out of the fridge. I keep my active starter in a glass mason jar in the fridge. It just slows down the growing process so it can last longer and I don't have to feed it. If it's out on the counter, it has to be fed every day. In the fridge, once a week, once every 2 weeks. But I'm gonna feed this, but I want to take it out of the fridge, let it get to room temperature. It is 8:15 p.m. Take it out tonight, leave it on the counter. In the morning, I will discard some and then feed the remaining. But what I'm gonna do is leave this out. You can see that there's a little bit of liquid on the top here. That's okay. There's like a name for it. I can't remember the name, but that's okay. You can just stir it in. In the morning, actually, this liquid will probably just be gone. So I'm gonna leave it out on my counter. Let it come to room temperature. And then in the morning, I'll show you the next step. Okay, it's the next day. It's a little later than I would have wanted it to have been for me to feed my starter. It's been out overnight on the counter. It's 11, but it's okay. I have my discard jar. You can use discard for pancakes, waffles, even white bread. So I'm going to take my starter. You can see it still has a little bit of the liquid on the top there. It's okay, just mix it in. It's not a big deal. It just means that it needs to be fed. So I'm gonna stir this up. This is much too much starter. So I'm gonna discard. Let's see if I can try to do it so it's like on the camera a little bit. Okay, I'm gonna discard. I wanna have maybe about 100 grams of starter here, and that might even be more than I need. I've got an empty mason jar. I've got my scale so that I can see how much starter I have in here. So I'm weighing my jar. I'm Z'ing it out so that it's 0. So the weight of the jar doesn't count when I weigh how much starter. This is my discard. I know that this is my active because it's got my rubber band. So I have 148 grams of starter here. I'm gonna go ahead and take out a little bit more. And I have 118 grams of starter right here. This is fine. I have my discard. I'm gonna put back in my fridge because I can go back and use this. I can use that right from the fridge. And then next week I'll put discard back in and I'll just keep filling. And then after a while I will feed my discard and then make a loaf, which I've made here. It's not the best loaf. It's overproofed, but whatever. I'm gonna Z it out. 118 grams of water. 118 grams of water. I've got 121 here. Okay, that's fine. Again, Z it out. 118 grams of bread flour. It's a 1-to-1-to-1 ratio. So one, like ratio of 1-to-1-to-1. Starter, water, flour. I'm using bread flour. You can really use any kind of flour, all purpose even. I use bread flour. 1:15. Let's do that. Okay. Some people don't measure at all. So then I've got everything in here. I'm going to stir this up. This is probably not the best tool to use, but it's the better one for me in my kitchen because it's stiff, it's long. I can get to the bottom of the jar. I'm scraping the side. The consistency is going to be like kind of thick pancakes. Make sure I've mixed and incorporated everything together. I'll scrape this down. Do one more stir. Everything is done right in here, inside of the mason jar. Okay, I'm gonna clean this off. I can see my starter is here, so I'm gonna put my rubber band here, which means that's where my fed starter is before it starts to feed and get active. After a while, I will clean my jar, but I've got my rubber band on where my starter is fed. I'll let this sit nice and warm. It'll double and I'll see it grow past the rubber band, which is why I put the rubber band on it. And when it doubles and it becomes active, then we can make our bread. Okay, checking in. It is 3:15. It's been 4 hours since I fed my starter, and you can see it's been on my counter where the rubber band is remember where the starter, get the baby, is where the starter was fed, and it has eaten and it's grown that much. Now it's not done eating because it hasn't reached its peakness, so we're gonna let it just sit on the counter. Typically 6 hours, 8 hours on the counter is sufficient for it to reach its active peakness, or the peak activeness of the peakness of the activeness, the very, when it's fully active before it starts to go down and settle and therefore not become active anymore. We want to make the bread when it's fully active. So it's almost doubled. Sometimes I've had, depending on my sourdough, triple, even like coming out, like spilling over the mason jar. So I just wanted to check in. I'll check back in a little bit and I'll show you kind of what we're looking for. It'll be like a dome shape on top when it's like fully peak, and you'll see the bubbles popping. Okay, checking back in. You can see we've had a lot of growth. It's 5:15, so it's been about 6 hours. And you can see down inside all those bubbles. This is good news, but we haven't reached our peak yet. We could probably make some bread with this, but we may want to just wait a little bit more, because if you look at it, you can see the bubbles are still popping, which means that it's still like eating. Can you see that? Okay. So this is good. This is good news. We're gonna leave it out A little bit more because it's a little bit cold. So we're gonna let it go a little bit more, and then I will make some bread.
Josie.